Chapter 636, Slaughterer. Admiral of Stars Cattleya thought before answering.
Tonight at 8, Dock 6.
Not bad. There's no delay at all.
Klein nodded slightly.
Okay.
Just as he said that, the light inside the crystal ball suddenly converged as the figure dressed in a black, classic robe darkened and blurred before quickly vanishing. Holding the crystal ball, which had turned very ordinary, Klein turned around, pulled open the door, and walked out. Glancing at the boss, who was guzzling alcohol while leaning against a wall, he threw the crystal ball at him. The boss fumbled to catch it as Klein unhurriedly walked down the stairs and left the warehouse. Once he was out of Hot Whale Dance, he took out his golden pocket watch and snapped it open to check the time.
It's almost noon. Most bars will be open.
Klein stopped a rental carriage and used FaceAct to tell the driver to head to the Lairdal Bar. It meant Dawn Bar in the local language. It was a place where adventurers would gather in the Gargus archipelago. To Klein, the gathering of different intel and news was meaningful. This might aid him in making the best judgment at critical points in time, allowing him to escape the misfortune of losing his life. Therefore, even if he didn't like bars, he often went there. He would get a cup of thick malt beer and silently sit in the corner of the bar counter and listen to any matters of interest which people mentioned at sea. In addition, he wanted to know about Roy King, who had been imprisoned in Bayham's Governor General's office. Over the past 2 months, Snake of Mercury Willow Septon hadn't sent him any dreams. Similarly, Fate Counselor Ricardo didn't summon his messenger to provide him any clues to a powerful mystical item. About 20 minutes later, the carriage came to a halt. A huge vertical signboard with the words Lairdal Bar appeared before Klein's eyes. He habitually took out 2 Solian notes and handed them to the carriage driver. It was only when he saw the worn face of the carriage driver did he suddenly realize something. He was overseas, and this was a colony of Faceac. It had its own currency. The smallest denomination was the kopeck, followed by the Faysilver and then the gold horn. They maintained the very intuitive base 10 denomination, making conversions very simple.
I forgot to visit the bank to exchange for kopeck and fey silver. I used it all at the inn and restaurant.
Klein was just about to look around to see if there were any banks around, when the carriage driver happily received the 2 1-soli notes. After repeatedly checking it, he beamed with his wrinkled face.
Thank you. Thank you for your generosity.
Klein got off the carriage. While walking towards the Lairdal Bar, he was recalling the carriage driver's delighted look.
Gold pounds, soli, and pence can be used here as well? Yes, Gargus Archipelago isn't that far from Toscarter and Oravi. Many items would be sold here, and many Loan adventurers like to visit the Sea of Beluga whales. To have Loan Kingdom's currency being used in private is rather common. Heh. Loan's industry and economic strength is greater than the Faceac Empire. It can even be said to be much stronger. The gold pound is worth a lot more than the gold horn. Wait.
Suddenly he recalled something. 1 gold pound could be used to exchange for 5.5 gold horn. This also meant that 2 soli was equal to 5.5 fey silver. And in the City of White, a rental carriage cost 4 fey silver an hour. There wasn't any prorated discounts.
It was no wonder the carriage driver was so happy.
Klein turned back and realized that the carriage had long disappeared. Gently exhaling, Klein pressed down on his hat and pushed open the heavy wooden door before entering the Lairdal Bar. In this world, bars near the dock and factory districts often sold lunch and dinner. Therefore, they opened around 11 in the morning. At that moment, there were quite a number of adventurers who had nothing better to do gathered in front of the bar counter. They ordered liquor and smoked fish or vegetable soup with oil floating on the surface. They had a great time eating all of that with bread.
Drinking Lanti-proof and Nepos at noon? Are they planning to be drunk the entire day? The customs of Faceac are really unacceptable.
Klein mumbled as he walked to the bar counter with a deadpan expression. He sat in a corner and rapped the wooden counter.
2 toasted bread with red sausage, a set of smoked whale meat, a bowl of thick vegetable soup, and a cup of Gola's beer.
Golas beer was rather popular along the eastern seaboard of Fasak. It was rather rare in Sonia Island and the Gargos archipelago.
New here?
The bartender glanced at Klein.
A total of 4 fey silver and 6 kopek.
I'm new because I don't drink liquor.
Klein ignored the bartender's question and threw 2 Solian notes. It was equivalent to 5 fey silver and 5 kopek. Considering how he was Gehrman Sparrow, Klein held back the urge to get the bartender to give him change, as he treated it as a tip. Of course, in a Backlund bar, that amount of food would have cost him about 2 soli. Having received a tip, the bartender didn't ask further. He skillfully poured a cup of Golas beer and pushed it towards Klein. The beer was rather black in color with plenty of foam. It had a pleasant charred taste, and there was slight stimulation in the mellow taste. It made Klein feel as though the alcohol content was rather high, as he suspected if some other liquor had been poured in. While waiting for his food, he sipped his beer and silently listened to the conversations of the surrounding adventurers. And the group's conversation was mainly centered around how someone had made a windfall who was killed by pirates, who finished off a pirate captain without claiming the bounty, and instead inherited the deceased pirate captain's subordinates, which woman in Nas had an illegitimate child, or who became a laughingstock for failing to perform at a brothel. When the Gargas specialty, thick soup brewed using sweet vegetables, onions, cabbage, carrots, fish, and butter, was served before Klein, he finally heard something interesting. An adventurer suppressed his voice as he said to his surroundings partners,
Have you heard of this? There's a 4th epoch ruin east of Gargas.
No! Who discovered it?
His surprised partner curiously asked. The adventurer looked to his left and right, as he said without much thought.
Gareth discovered it. As you know, he's a seafarer who's good at diving. As he was drunk, he was thrown off the deck and sank to the bottom of the sea. Who knew that he ended up discovering remnants of steel buildings? They were definitely steel buildings made from human hands.
And then?
His partner pressed. The adventurer chuckled.
Gareth followed the ruins and discovered an abandoned sea well of unknown depths. It was already filled with seawater, but it still left him with extreme horror. Holy Lord of Storms, this might even lead to the core of the land. He said that there was something summoning him inside, but he didn't dare explore it, so he floated up in fear.
A deep sea well. Strange attraction. This might not be a 4th epoch ruin. Perhaps it's from the 3rd epoch or 2nd epoch. Little Sun had mentioned that during the Dark Epic, sea monsters were subject to Elf King Sonithrim and helped him rule the bottom of the sea. Sweet, salty, and a little tartish.
Klein drank a mouthful of thick vegetable soup as he forked a piece of smoked beluga whale meat. The adventurers didn't talk about Gareth's encounter. As there wasn't any sight of heart-stirring gold or jewelry, mystical items or beyonder ingredients at the moment. The conversation quickly steered to a few adventurers who they weren't friendly with. They mocked about how they had married beautiful natives who all turned into stout and fat women a couple of years later. Their strength could even match those of low-sequence beyonders. Finally, they concluded that it might have to do with how people from Fasak had tiny bits of giant blood running in their veins. They didn't say anything of value until Klein finished his lunch and drank his beer, but the number of people inside Lairdal Bar kept increasing. Suddenly, the heavy door was pushed open as it slammed into the wall. A top hat-donning young man, who was clearly of Lowen blood, rushed in. He shouted nervously,
Is there anyone from the Adventurer Association?
Yes, Bilt still owes me the creation of 1 item.
Klein watched as the young man looked around frantically while constantly turning his head back. It appeared as though someone was pursuing him. Before he could consider whether to render assistance, 3 adventurers stood up from different corners. One of them was more than 2 meters tall. He had wide shoulders and firm muscles. His hair was slightly blonde, and his eyes were a deep blue. He was rather eye-catching.
The strength he appears to have matches with his substance. This isn't a beyonder of quite a significant sequence.
Klein retracted his gaze as he became a spectator once again as he looked out the door. Soon, a man in a linen shirt and brown jacket appeared. He was of medium build, and his lips were purple. His brown eyes could hardly conceal the intense, baneful look he tried to hide. Klein instantly connected the man to a portrait on a bounty. It was the second mate of the king of immortality Agolito, Slaughter Kirchais, with a bounty of 9,500 pounds.
This is a notorious pirate.
Klein's nerves tensed up as his gaze locked onto the man. He naturally hung his left hand down as his body prepared to lunge forward. Kirchais swept his gaze at the 2-meter-tall giant and saw Klein before retracting his gaze. He turned to leave the Lairdal bar without stopping at all.
Very decisive, very alert. Was he worried about that giant, or is his intuition very sharp to a particular extent, just like the premonition towards danger like devils?
Klein frowned slightly, confident that he hadn't revealed any killing intent. He had even controlled his gaze very well. Klein wondered as he drank the remaining goalless beer without participating in the private conversations of the Adventurer Association members. He left the bar and came onto the streets. Now, he didn't wish to give himself new troubles aside from finding mermaids. After circling the area, Klein discovered that Slaughterer Kirchais had long departed. His whereabouts were unknown. Hence, he silently returned to his inn. City of Silver. Inside the spire, Derek Berg once again met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. He clearly remembered that nearly 70 days ago, Colin had told him that in 2 months, he should prepare to be sent out on an exploration mission. Chapter 637, The Future. Colin had his back to the window as he asked, without any abnormality in his tone.
Are you done with your preparations?
With the axe of Hurricane attached to him, Derek lowered his head slightly.
I'm done.
In the past 2 months, through the patrol missions and arduous practice, he had fully mastered the various Beyonder powers of Solar High Priest. He was already not too far from digesting the potion. What he wished for the most was to obtain the Sun Pathway Sequence 6 potion formula in the next 2 to 3 tarot gatherings, so as to ensure his continual advancement. The release of Shepherd Lovia made him feel highly threatened. He believed that only by reaching the same Sequence 5 would he have a chance of effectively putting her in check and avert the potential danger of the City of Silver. However, with the knowledge of the acting method and without the lack of Beyonder ingredients, all he needed to do was survive the various patrols and exploration missions, and make enough contributions to make Sequence 6 a reachable target. However, Sequence 5 required a specific ritual which made it relatively difficult. The grizzled Colin nodded.
In another 2 days, I'll be leading a small team to the vicinity of the Giant King's court. We will do a second sweep of Afternoon Town which we previously found, and your powers are very suitable for such matters.
Afternoon Town. Having been brushing up on his knowledge of legends over the past few months, Derek was no stranger to this name. It was an area that needed to be passed when going to the Giant King's court from the Kingdom of Silver. It was a town where humans and giants lived together. It clustered around the ancient god's residence, which was forever fixed at sunset. Just like the last door that separated the real world to a mythological legend.
Yes, Your Excellency.
Derek couldn't find a reason to reject. City of White? As. In a particular inn. As. Klein sat behind a desk as he looked at the constantly changing clouds outside the window, silently awaiting the arrival of evening. At 8, he would board the Star Pirates' flagship, Future, on Dock 6 to head to the furthest eastern front of the Sonia Sea. No matter what happened in the Gargos archipelago or this region of the sea known as a pirate's playground, they would have nothing to do with him. Therefore, he didn't attempt to hunt the small number of pirates with bounties on their heads that he met while walking in the big and small alleys or bars and casinos. He didn't want to mess up his plans of finding mermaids.
My spiritual intuition tells me that Slaughter Kirchais from noon seems to have targeted me. I wouldn't mind if he wishes to send himself to his death. Well, battle strategy can be despised, but battle technique needs to be treated seriously. Without using the sea god's scepter or tinder, I'm at best a little stronger than him. I'm at an advantage by being well-rounded and strange enough.
Klein half closed his eyes as he imagined the gathering of countless spherical lights, and he used it to enter cogitation rapidly so as to maintain the acuteness of his spirituality. After an unknown period of time, his spiritual perception was triggered, as he opened his eyes immediately. At that moment, the sun had already set in the west. The fiery red colors seemed to burn the sea as long shadows were drawn out through the curtains. The shadows seemed to come alive as they danced about before distorting and standing up to project themselves on the wall. Its pitch-black darkness was like the manifestation of the immense evil at the bottom of a human's heart. Klein watched this scene with a deadpan expression. He raised his left palm high as he slowly extended his fingers. The pitch-black shadow produced a voice that sounded hoarse, as though it held sandcloth in it. While looking at Klein, it said,
"German Sparrow, do not interfere in the matter that happened this afternoon. This is the will of the King of Immortality."
With that said, the shadow slid down like flowing water and scattered into the darkness, having its original state restored. Klein didn't pay attention to the shadow's changes. Instead, he cast his gaze outside. He could sense that the person controlling the shadow was somewhere across the street. Hence, he didn't plan on acting upon an incorporeal entity.
Indeed, Slaughterer Kircheiss recognized me as the crazy adventurer, German Sparrow, who loves to hunt pirates. That's why he didn't hesitate to turn around at noon. He might not be afraid of me, but there was another rather powerful adventurer present as well. The power he revealed just now is somewhat similar to the Desire Apostle in Backland. He's more and more likely to be a Beyonder from the Devil Pathway. Using the King of Immortality to scare me. Do you think I'll submit just like that? I never intended to involve myself in it. By doing so, I'm actually a little curious. Forget it. Finding the mermaids is of utmost importance as of now. I shouldn't create incidents for myself.
Klein retracted his gaze as he lampooned. He was originally wondering if he should report the matter to the Church of the God of Combat in Naz, but after serious consideration, he discovered that it was likely to be meaningless. The Church of the God of Combat is the only legal religion in the Faesac Empire. The number of high-sequence Beyonders they have is definitely a little higher than the Church of the Evernight Goddess, but just by a little. Even if the demigods of the Faesac royal family and military are added, with the extensive land and numerous colonies it has, making the number of critical areas that require protection crucial, they would definitely be lacking in manpower. The Gargas Archipelago, which is far away from the Empire and in a relatively ordinary location, with the only industry being whale fishing, there's no doubt that it's only an afterthought and doesn't have any saints protecting it. According to what Klein had previously learned, the Archbishop of the Gargas Diocese for the Church of the God of Combat was only a Sequence 5 guardian. Together with the Tribunal's Inquisitor, a Baron from the royal family, and a Commodore from the military, they form the highest level of Beyonder combat forces here. Of course, the existence of sealed artifacts had guaranteed the control of the area. Klein suspected that the Church of the God of Combat in Nas had at least one Grade 1 sealed artifact. Only by doing so could they combine it with their fleets and Beyonders to ensure that the whale oil and gray amber trade industry wouldn't be under the control of pirates and not end up as one of the vassals of one of the four kings. Under any sudden assaults, they were able to use it to last until reinforcements arrived. And it was precisely because of this that the officials in the Gargas Archipelago ultimately maintained a defensive state. As long as the pirates didn't cause problems, they were allowed to freely enter and leave.
Reporting things wouldn't be of any use. No wonder it's called a pirate's playground. It's no wonder Bilt wants to organize an adventurer association.
Klein sighed as he gave up his previous thoughts. After dinner and resting for a while, Klein took out his gold pocket watch and opened it to check the time. Seeing that it was already 7, he held a ritual and summoned himself before responding to himself. He then brought different items into the gray fog while adjusting his inventory. As he was adventuring out at sea on the future, the Murloc cufflink and various sea god domain charms were necessary. Therefore, Klein left Tinder and the sun brooch above the gray fog. With creeping hunger as his main force, he matched it with the biological poison bottle and a revolver, which was loaded with different Beyonder bullets. He still had 7 purifying bullets, 13 demon-hunting bullets, and 2 exorcism bullets. Wearing his coat, Klein placed down Azic's whistle, as well as his wallet containing only 50 pounds into his inner pocket. Then, he stored the silver adventurer harmonica and charms together. After doing all of this, he touched the revolver beneath his armpit, polished the blue cuff link at his left wrist, and buttoned his double-breasted frock coat. He wore his half-top hat, picked up his black suitcase, which contained only his change of clothes and some daily necessities, and left the inn for the harbor via a carriage. After waiting for a while at Dock 6, he saw a gigantic sailboat slowly appear from the distance. According to his limited knowledge of boats, Klein knew that a sailboat of such length wasn't scientific. However, this didn't deter it from cruising calmly on the Black Sea surface as it headed for the lighthouse which emitted its light. As the sailboat approached, the flag gradually became clear. The crimson but weak moonlight allowed the people at the harbor to see 10 white stars of the same size as they circled a cold eyelash-less eye on the flag. The pirates and sailors who were watching over their ships exclaimed as every dock in the harbor was filled with stirred emotions.
Admiral of Stars, the future.
After more than 10 seconds, the defensive cannons on the two ends of the mountain nervously adjusted themselves and aimed at the gigantic sailboat which didn't conceal itself. Clang, clang, clang! The distant cathedral produced light and ethereal chimes, signaling that it was 8 o'clock sharp. As the tenseness around the dock became more evident, the future came to a halt. At some point in time, a woman dressed in a black classical robe appeared at the bow. Her clothes were filled with different symbols and magic labels, making her look like a powerful warlock of ancient legends. Under the crimson moonlight, the ground beneath her suddenly lit up. Resplendent starlight scattered down, forming a long, transparent bridge. The long bridge constantly extended forward before landing on Dock 6.
An impressive show, as expected of one of the 7 pirate admirals. Furthermore, she's a full admiral, a rank higher than iceberg and ailment.
Klein sighed as he wished to extend his palm to cover his face. He didn't wish to let others know that the crazy adventurer Gehrman Sparrow was cooperating with Admiral of Stars Catalea.
At this point, I can only maintain my persona. Once I'm done digesting the potion, and by the time I'm back in the northern continent, there wouldn't be Gehrman Sparrow anymore.
Klein walked out of the shadows as he pressed the half-top hat on his head. He smoothly walked onto the starry bridge. His footsteps were firm as Klein walked with his back straight, while being targeted by numerous defensive cannons. Under the gazes with ambiguous meanings, he unhurriedly walked to the docked future. The bridge under his feet was transparent as the dark blue seawater, which was almost black, ebbed beneath him. It would make anyone with acrophobia turn limp.
Thankfully, I've long become a clown. I've even jumped off a clock tower.
Klein covered the last 10 meters with a cold expression before stepping onto the deck of the future. Faced with the black-eyed Admiral of Stars Catalea, who had purple tint to her eyes, he didn't show any nervousness. He took off his hat and bowed.
Good evening, ma'am.
Chapter 638, Poison Expert. While Klein bowed, the purple tint in black-haired Catalea's eyes converged as they seemed to turn into an abyss that could suck up souls. What already exuded an air of mystery had turned even more obvious. She saw that the astral projection, deep inside Gehrman Sparrow's ether body, was pure darkness. In minute areas, there were dark flows with unending changes. She saw that Gehrman Sparrow's left hand was bright and lustrous, but it was stained with a sanguine color that couldn't be dispersed. She saw a blue luster by Gehrman Sparrow's wrist and a silver flow on his left pocket. The colors were bright and obvious, as though they were connected to the illusory stacked spirit world. There was the sound of the tide and the illusory sounds of wind surrounding the items. She saw an intermix of green and black lusters by Gehrman Sparrow's right pocket, as well as 2 points of golden, silver, and bronze under his armpit. At his chest there was a deep grayish-white like rotting death. 4 mystical items and beyonder artifacts or spirituality charms in units of 10. Catalea's eyes were a little dazzled as she couldn't help but close them for a moment. She nodded as well.
Good evening, Mr. Sparrow.
Even as a powerhouse who was famous across the seas, a senior member of the 7 pirate admirals, she seldom saw people who armed themselves to the teeth with beyonder items. Of course, she had also seen people with more mystical items, beyond her artifacts and spirituality charms, but they had secret organizations backing them. They typically had several ships and more than 1,000 pirates under them. Many things needed to be turned in, split, and shared, as well as sold in order to maintain and strengthen one's faction. Few things could be left in their possession as a result. However, few was relative. They could compare with what Gehrman Sparrow presently had, but Catalea had reduced her items to only 2 after several trades. They were 2 items that were sufficiently powerful and mystical enough to match her identity as a pirate admiral. Apart from the lusters representing different items, Catalea's black eyes, which were slightly purple, could also tell that Gehrman wasn't real enough. He seemed to be hidden behind thick curtains.
This is the reason why he gives me the feeling like he's not a living person at the Tarot Club. He has quite a number of secrets. It involves at least a Sequence 3 saint or an even higher level angel.
Catalea didn't dare take another look, as the glow in her eyes were no longer as profound. Meanwhile, she mocked herself, believing that some of her guesses about the world and Gehrman Sparrow were somewhat funny.
Involves a Sequence 3 saint or an even higher leveled angel? Heh, there's nothing wrong with that since he's, like me, a member of the Tarot Club. We're definitely involved with Mr. Fool, who's likely a reawakened ancient god.
After exchanging greetings, Catalea didn't engage in further small talk. She led Klein towards the cabin. At this moment, the Future, which had been docked, set sail again. A long contour was drawn on the surface of the sea as it cruised east of the whale fishing route. With that, the tense atmosphere at the Naz harbor dispersed. Gazes from various sailors were cast over. Klein didn't show any signs of pressure as he surveyed the area and said with a tone, as though he was back in his own home.
There are fewer people than I expected.
Catalea turned her head and glanced at him before answering simply.
East of the whaling route is very dangerous. Only Ludwell heads there frequently as though he's searching for something. Apart from the Future, the pirate crew's other ships wouldn't join us. Similarly, a large number of sailors have been placed on the other ships. Only the minimum number needed to guarantee the successful voyage of the ship has been maintained.
A very wise choice. Ludwell. That Admiral Hal Ludwell? Mr. Hangman mentioned him a long time ago. He said that he was beginning to study Sonia Sea's eastern end of the navigation.
Klein nodded a little without a word. This was Gehrman Sparrow's bearing. He silently observed his surroundings and realized that the deck, the cabin, and spars were covered with mysterious and abstract symbols. As a whole, it looked like a gigantic ritualistic magic ceremony.
It's like the Golden Dream. It's a sailboat of mystery, but it's not at the level of a ghost ship. Compared to Admiral of Stars and Vice Admiral Iceberg, Tracy, who has only become a pirate admiral for the past few months, clearly is considerably more inferior. The Black Death has nothing special about it.
Klein retracted his gaze and followed Catalea to the cabin's entrance. Waiting here was a man in dungarees and a white shirt. He was in his 30s and looked strong and fit. He had thick body hair. As for his forearm, which was exposed outside, it seemed like he was donning a brown sweater. He wore a circular hair with a depression in the middle, as he revealed a smile and stretched out his right hand.
The first mate of the Future, Frank Lee. Good evening, Mr. Sparrow.
Poison expert Frank Lee, who has a bounty of 7,000 pounds.
Klein instantly recognized the man. Considering how Gehrman Sparrow didn't have the habit of shaking hands, he bent his back slightly and said,
Good evening.
Frank Lee retracted his right hand and glanced at Catalea. He said while maintaining his smile,
You seem to know me? That's right. The picture I took before is on my arrest warrant. Don't mind the poison expert title. I'm a very friendly person, as long as I'm not facing those darn bastards. My greatest hobby is to study soil and figure out crossbreeding techniques. Believe me, this is the future of humanity.
Catalea gave Klein an introduction in the most subtle manner.
But the people from the Church of Earth Mother don't believe him.
He's originally someone from the Church of Earth Mother? Crossbreeding techniques are good. As long as the quantity rises, it will be able to provide for more humans, raising the poverty line.
Klein looked at Frank Lee, and he calmly said courteously and truthfully,
This is something commendable.
Frank Lee's blue eyes revealed a clear look of pleasant surprise.
You are indeed an adventurer who doesn't share the viewpoint of the common man. Excellent. Excellent. There are just too few people like you. I've only tried crossbreeding a bull, a cow, and wheat together, allowing calves to be born like wheat. For that, I was almost sent to court by the Church of Earth Mother. My benevolent mother. They don't understand your true will at all.
Cross-breeding a bull, a cow, and wheat. You devil!
Only then did Klein realize that his understanding of crossbreeding techniques was different from what Frank Lee was talking about. He maintained a stoic expression without providing any further explanation. Under the lead of Frank Lee, who was reeling in a sudden bout of enthusiasm, Klein walked through the corridor beside Catalea. After stepping on the steps and arriving at a higher level, Klein's spiritual perception stirred as he cast his gaze to a shadow beside him. A figure grew out of the distorted darkness. A thin and tall but pale figure. His cheeks were nearly transparent, and his nose bridge was disharmonious and tall. His entire being gave off a sickly feeling. Frank Lee introduced with a smile.
This is the second mate of the future, Heath Doyle.
Bloodless Heath, whose bounty is higher than yours at 7,600 pounds?
Klein quickly matched the face to the correct bounty notice. Heath nodded as a greeting before receding back into the shadows. When turning around to head for the captain's cabin, Frank Lee warmly mentioned Heath Doyle's situation.
You are telling me your second mate's sequence directly?
Klein nearly pricked his brows. He secretly glanced at Catalea and discovered her masked exasperation. Frank Lee said in a flaunting tone,
Are you puzzled and worried that he's a devout believer of the true Creator, a lunatic who has been tainted? No, haha, he's a lucky fellow. Due to an incident, the ordinary hymn was scattered with the potion concocted from a rose bishop's beyonder ingredients. The potion seeped into him, bit by bit, and he survived the ordeal. Finally, he became quite a special beyonder. As he didn't experience the listener stage, he wasn't tainted, nor did he become a lunatic. As long as he doesn't proactively use the beyonder power, listen, he remains an ordinary person.
What an enviable fellow. He reached sequence 6 in one go. Furthermore, he didn't turn mentally unstable like the sea serpent Calvetua.
Klein sighed silently as he watched Admiral of Stars open the door to the captain's cabin. Catalea pointed inside.
Your room is diagonally across from here. Frank will send you over. If there's anything, you can come to me directly. You can have your meals at the dining hall at any time. You can also get Frank to send someone to bring food to your room. What you choose is dependent on your preference.
Admiral of Stars does things in a very clear and direct manner. Yes, she's a mature and wise lady.
Klein praised inwardly as he replied without a change in expression.
Okay.
He took this opportunity to glance at the layout of the captain's cabin, discovering that it contained a bookshelf, a full-body mirror, a table, and a carpet.
She actually reads. Isn't she unable to digest all the information the hidden sage imbues in her?
Klein thought in amusement. At this moment, having seen their conversation come to an end, Frank Lee passionately promoted,
Mr. Sparrow, would you like a serving of roasted potatoes tonight? When you chew it, it's like beef, and its taste is like beef, but it's certainly potatoes.
Will I get sick eating that?
Klein answered coldly.
I don't eat supper.
All right, then.
Frank Lee drooped his shoulders and was just about to lead Klein to his room. Marco. Oh, Catalea suddenly thought of something and said,
Mr. Sparrow, you've likely hunted quite a number of enemies and have received several spoils of war. I'm curious about the number of Beyonder characteristics you have left. Perhaps they can be used to reduce the remaining price of the trip.
Klein considered for a moment and answered frankly,
Most of them have been sold. There's interrogator, pugilist, and lunatic left.
He didn't mention the all-black eye or the beyonder characteristic of nightmare?
He really is the most famous adventurer during the past few months. Even after selling most of them, he still has 3 sets of beyonder characteristics.
Catalea sighed inwardly as she pondered.
I want pugilist.
She had a warrior subordinate from the Gargus archipelago who had long made enough contributions to apply for an advancement. Chapter 639, Name List. There was no reason for Klein to decline Catalea's request. He thought for 2 seconds and said,
700 pounds.
Very fair.
Catalea didn't haggle. Sequence 8. Beyonder characteristics typically cost 600 to 700 pounds, but there was often a premium if someone was in desperate need for it. After all, such items seldom appeared at Beyonder gatherings. Klein didn't immediately complete the transaction. He raised his suitcase and said without a change in expression,
I'll give it to you tomorrow.
He didn't bring the pugilist Beyonder characteristic with him, as most items of value had been thrown above the gray fog. Catalea wasn't surprised by Gehrman Sparrow's response. She nodded.
That wouldn't be an issue.
She had encountered many similar cases. It usually meant that the pugilist Beyonder characteristic was stored with items which wasn't meant to be known by others. Therefore, it was impossible for Gehrman Sparrow to open his suitcase in front of her to complete the transaction on the spot. A crazy adventurer definitely had his secrets. Catalea paused for a second before adding,
There won't be any surveillance placed in your room.
whatever she could see had already been seen by her.
It's fine.
Klein curled the corners of his lips and coldly smiled. His previous considerations was to place down items like Azek's copper whistle and Will Septon's paper crane before holding a ritual or going above the gray fog. It was to resist any spying in the sense of mysticism. Then he could use the washroom as a way to avoid physical surveillance. Of course, he wasn't too worried that Admiral of Stars would go overboard. He didn't believe that she was afraid of the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, but that Catalea had no reason to do so. She definitely had milder and more concealed means of observing. For example, getting the help of a beyonder from the spectator pathway. Klein took off his hat, bowed, and followed poison expert Frank Lee to return to his own room. Seeing him walk off at an adequate speed, Ka turned into the captain's cabin, picked up a heavy pair of glasses, and wore it. Backland, at the Harvest Church south of the bridge. In the eyes of an ordinary person, Bishop Utrovsky, whose height was that of a half-giant, put down the Bible in his hand. He prayed once around the hall and smiled.
The number of believers is increasing.
Is that so?
Emlyn White, who was in a brown priest robe, was wiping the candle racks as he said without even looking up. He knew that the number of believers of Earth Mother had indeed increased significantly. It would have been a miracle in the past to have a handful of people be in attendance for praying on weekdays or in the daytime. Now, there was often close to 10. Father Utrovsky looked down at the busy vampire priest and chuckled.
Anyone can tell if they aren't blind. You have contributed greatly to this. If not for your concocting of the medicine and treating the plague, and your willingness and sincerity in teaching people about medicine, our faith wouldn't have been that easily accepted by the residents of this borough.
Emlyn held a cloth and straightened his back. He tipped his chin slightly.
I was only acting. What do you mean by our faith? Don't lump me with you.
Emlyn's expression twisted before he said with a smile,
Speaking of the blind, it reminds me of a joke. It's said that the demand for blind people in Backland far exceeds supply. This is because they are widely believed to be most suitable to be jurors.
Father Utrovsky ignored the joke and benevolently said,
Regardless of the goal, you have contributed greatly to the spread of the faith of Earth Mother. Besides, this also proves that you have a kind heart.
Pooey! I said so back then, but why didn't you believe me?
Emlyn looked up at the priest's massive body before retracting his gaze in silence. After busying himself at the cathedral, he changed into his normal clothes and wore a silk top hat that sheltered him from the sun. He then walked onto Rose Street. He stealthily sized up his surroundings and didn't notice any signs of monitoring.
The red glove named Leonard from before really hasn't appeared again. I thought my act of exposing his secrets and buying Tinder would result in me being constantly investigated in secret.
Emlyn White shook his head indiscernibly as he felt puzzled. In the earliest stages, he had planned on taking in the hanged man's theory to incur the investigations of the Red Gloves so as to disrupt the monitoring from the upper echelons of the Sanguine. He could then achieve a perfect equilibrium by using the Church of Earth Mother's blessed, Utrovsky. But things didn't develop as he had expected. Leonard Mitchell had apparently left Backlund very quickly. At the end of February, Emlyn had made a detour to 7 Pinster Street while he was out once, only to discover that it was uninhabited. Without thinking about this matter any further, he walked to the end of the street, got onto a rental carriage, and headed straight for the Odora Villa. He was left to a study on the first floor by an attendant where he saw many Sanguine who had recently come of age. Among them was a Sanguine who had already become a baron. He thought,
I'm not the only one?
Before closing the door. He then said to the owner, Cosmiodora,
My lord, was I not called here because of a summoning from Lord Nibs?
He had said my lord rather indifferently, as though he was calling him by name. This was because he was also a Sanguine baron. The difference was that he hadn't publicized it. Cosmi was a very refined, middle-aged gentleman. He smiled and said,
All of you are outstanding, young Sanguine. My grandfather has entrusted all of you with some tests.
Another Sanguine baron, Russ Bathory, who was lucky to receive an inheritance, asked,
What tests are they?
Cosmi drank a mouthful of dark red blood, which was concocted with grape wine as he scanned the area. Perhaps you might not know, but the Snake of Fate from the Life School of Thought has disappeared for quite some time. As Emlyn White and the other Sanguine looked puzzled, Cosmi continued,
But I believe all of you should know that the Life School of Thought is a coalition which was barely formed, thanks to their belief in fate. They allied under the massive pressure placed by the 7 Orthodox churches in the beginning of the 5th epoch, and are formed by beyonders who think of themselves as absolutely rational and aloof, those that worship the primordial moon, and those that seek the essence of life and spirituality. Due to the existence of the Snake of Fate, there hadn't been many serious problems internally. Their worship of the primordial moon was ultimately restricted to a fixed symbolic meaning. Furthermore, the process of formula exchange was melded with a master-apprentice heritage system. Unfortunately, with the disappearance of the Snake of Fate, this process has been disrupted. The primordial moon's believers rapidly turned passionate, producing a fracture in the faction that represents fate. An intense conflict ensued as a result. This matter was used by the Rose School of Thought. It dealt quite a sizable amount of damage to them.
Emlyn White, Russ Bathory, and other Sanguine remained perplexed. After sharing the background information, Cosmi dived into the details.
Worshippers of the primordial moon are our eternal enemies. They have always been hunting us, concocting us into potions to achieve strength. Now, we will not let go of such an opportunity. Here's a list of primordial moon worshippers and their situations. Whoever finds them and kills them will be the victor of this test. My grandfather, as well as various important figures, would reward you generously. If you complete a portion of the list, we will determine this by numbers. Of course, these people were selected, and all of you are capable of dealing with them. The rest will be tracked down by the important figures.
Upon hearing the first few sentences, Emlyn White had no intention of participating. Despite having hatred for those artificial vampires, he found the matter troublesome, laborious, and tiresome. He'd rather stay at home in silence to chat with his dolls. By the time he realized that it was a competition, as well as sensing the gazes of Russ Bathory and the other Sanguine which were cast on him, Emlyn suddenly straightened his back and tipped his chin.
No problem.
His red eyes slowly swept across the other creatures in the room. On the future, inside a spacious room with an attached bathroom, Klein stood in front of the window, looking out into the undulating blue ocean. In a good mood, he breathed in the cold winds that came from the north. The flagship of the Admiral of Stars had already separated from the other ships in the fleet as it began to cruise alone. After an unknown period of time, 2 whaling ships appeared ahead. Once they noticed the flag containing the stars and eye flying from the future, they immediately responded nervously. They quickly adjusted their positions, aiming their starboards over, their cannons ready to shoot at any moment. At the same time, spears and harpoons, which were shot using explosives, were directed in the same direction. The blond and large fishermen from the Gargus archipelago held tridents and guns as they braced for an attack, either by standing or crouching. Klein also noticed that there were a number of women with figures similar to the Hulk. It was obvious at a glance that they were heavy and good at fighting. The future didn't mind their welcome. It continued cruising past them, heading deeper into the whaling route. After cruising for a while, Klein saw more pirate ships ahead. They were clustered around the sea route's periphery, their motives unknown. The future came close without standing on ceremony. Immediately, the pirate ships reacted like startled birds as they quickly retreated. Sensing the future slowing down, Klein left his room in puzzlement. Just as he approached the captain's cabin, he discovered Cuttlefish walking out. This woman wore a thick pair of glasses on her nose bridge, hiding her mysterious purple eyes. She glanced at Klein and said succinctly,
Someone discovered a ruin which is said to be from the 4th epoch at the bottom of the sea in the waters around here. We plan on taking a look while on the way.
Bottom of the sea? Ruin from the 4th epoch? So this piece of news has already spread? I was wondering why I got to learn it so easily.
Klein instantly recalled the rumor he had heard from the Lairdal bar. He said inwardly in enlightenment. Chapter 640. Female Pirate. Klein had a certain degree of curiosity towards the outcome of the exploration. He didn't ask further as he walked past the captain's cabin and walked down the stairwell. After a few seconds, he felt his throat itch. He couldn't help but raise his fist to his mouth and cough. Klein wasn't surprised by such a development, as it was inevitable. He had carried the biological poison bottle for more than 2 hours last night. Only when it was late at night and his confirmation that Admiral of Stars and crew didn't have any intention of attacking him did he move the mystical item into a black suitcase. Sadly, he ended up falling sick. Of course, the amount of time he brought the biological poison bottle with him wasn't considered long. His body wasn't in a weakened state, so his resulting illness wasn't anything serious. He just felt his tonsils swell in pain. Cuttlefish, who was walking slowly behind, saw this scene, but she didn't find it a problem. Instead, she found it normal. It was common knowledge for knowledgeable beyonders that mystical items were bound to have negative side effects. Furthermore, they would learn from the 7 Orthodox churches and categorize those with serious side effects, which made them impossible to possess or use for prolonged time as sealed artifacts. The reason why Cuttlefish had sold or exchanged many of her low and mid-level mystical items was firstly because she wanted to better strengthen her survivability. Secondly, the various negative effects from multiple items were troubling. Often one could avoid one but not the other. Some negative effects might even stack and synergize into something worse. Therefore, to most beyonders, the disadvantages surpassed the advantages. She discovered that Gehrman Sparrow had used mystical items beyond her weapons and spirituality charms to arm himself to the teeth. While being amazed, she was already guessing at the type of negative effects he was facing. From what she saw today, it was a temporary simple illness. With steady steps, Klein arrived on the deck and saw Frank Lee. He was still dressed in a white shirt and dungarees. His arm was stained with dirt, as though he wasn't afraid of the cold winds that blew down at him. Frank warmly waved his hand and said,
Good morning, Gehrman. Here, try my latest product. This is definitely the most welcomed item at sea.
As he said, he raised his other hand. In it was a wide and fat fish of an unknown breed.
No, I don't want to know what monster you have cooked up this time.
Klein paused in his footsteps as he looked at him with a cold expression. Frank Lee didn't discover any problems with his attitude. He pulled out a dagger from his waist and stabbed the fish before slicing a hole open. Blood flowed out and accurately landed in a large beer cup on the deck. It didn't emit any fishy smell. Frank Lee half closed his eyes as he fervently said,
Smell that? It's such an intoxicating alcoholic fragrance. This is a fish who has red wine replacing its blood. As such, the wine contains lots of nutrients.
Klein realized he was at a loss for words. Frank looked at the surrounding sailors in excitement before saying to Gehrman Sparrow,
Do you know what's the most troubling matter out at sea? That's when we run out of alcohol without being anywhere close to shore. As long as this kind of fish can rapidly reproduce and become the sea's primary produce, then we won't be lacking any alcohol no matter where we are. By the way, they can be categorized by species. Some will produce Lantai-proof, others Nepos, red wine, and beer. The beer needs to come from sharks or whales. Otherwise, there won't be enough.
Isn't the most troubling matter the lack of water? Of course all of you can use beer to replace water most of the time because it doesn't easily spoil. Those poor fishes.
Klein was pondering over a response to Frank when Cattleya came on deck. She walked past him and questioned her first mate.
Is Nina done with her preparations?
Frank pointed at a shadow formed by the sails.
Yes, she has already finished a bottle of Nepos.
The so-called preparations are to drink a bottle of Nepos, a specialty of Fasak, the Nepos, which can light a fire.
Klein suddenly felt that Nina, the lady mentioned by the first mate, was likely someone with Fasak blood. In the dark, a female figure slowly stood up and walked over.
Captain, I want a bottle of Sonia blood wine more.
She was more than 1.8 meters tall. Her blonde hair was casually tied up into a high pigtail. Her facial features weren't anything outstanding, but she had the striking traits of someone from Fasak. Her skin was fair and her eyes were dull. This lady named Nina wore a black tight suit made of fish skin. The top and bottom seemed to be a one-piece, fully accentuating her stunning figure. Such a style was rather sexy to begin with. Nina's breasts were also far above what was normal. It was obvious what the surrounding pirates were looking at. Klein felt a little embarrassed and wished to move his gaze away. However, on second thought, Gehrman Sparrow was definitely not such an untried person. All he could do was empty his gaze and look straight at Nina's face. Frank Lee still didn't hold back in his introductions.
Gehrman, this is our bosun, Nina. She's also the navigator's assistant. Haha, her sequence's name is Seafarer.
Apart from his research of crossbreeding, this poison expert is rather simple. I now recall that this lady named Nina has a bounty of 3,600 pounds. Her nickname is Seabed Murderer. Sigh, after seeing so many bounty notices, there are some I can't immediately recall.
Klein looked at Nina's eyes and nodded calmly.
Good morning, ma'am.
Nina held back her smile and sized up Klein.
Good morning, Mr. Sparrow. I'm very curious if Vice Admiral Ailment is really as charming as the rumors say.
As a female pirate who had mixed with low and mid-class people for extended periods of time, she was always very frank and direct towards both men and women. She didn't show any coyness. She had originally planned on asking Gehrman Sparrow if she was lacking in charm, or ask if he was the cold type, which resulted in her being completely ignored or him showing any reaction. But considering how the man standing before her was a powerful guy, an adventurer who nearly successfully hunted Vice Admiral Ailment, or a lunatic who could draw his gun and shoot at any moment, she rationally held back her jesting words. She switched to asking about Vice Admiral Ailment.
How am I to answer you?
Klein gloomily said.
Her bounty is extremely charming.
Nina was taken aback, somewhat at a loss for a response to continue the conversation. Hence, she turned to look at Admiral of Stars.
Captain, do we begin now?
Cattleya, who felt her bounty flash through her mind for some baffling reason, nodded.
Begin.
Just as she said that, Nina took large strides to the side of the ship. With her right hand supporting herself, she leaped into the sea, swimming downwards like a gigantic black fish. At the same time, there were a few splashes. A few sailors had jumped down as well to provide her aid.
She begins at the mention of it. She didn't need any additional time to prepare. This lady has the temperament of the Church of Storms, as expected of a beyonder from the sailor pathway.
Klein looked out the ship as he couldn't help but cough. Frank Lee asked directly.
You're sick?
Klein nodded slightly and said,
A little.
Frank thought for a moment. He didn't say a word as he rushed back into the cabin, his destination unknown. By the side, Catalina nudged her heavy glasses and smiled.
Frank is a poison expert, but he's also an outstanding doctor.
As expected of someone from the planter pathway.
Klein didn't ask further as he stood there, awaiting Nina's preliminary exploration. Seeing the sudden silence that became somewhat awkward, Catalina took a few steps forward and said, seemingly in passing,
In another day, we will be leaving the Whaling Sea route.
But we're at least a week from those waters?
Klein thought before asking. Catalina's gaze looked at Klein's eyes through her thick glasses, as though she wanted to tell how much he knew of the extremely dangerous waters.
That is, if we follow the Whaling Sea route. In fact, this will lead further north and be more roundabout. I know of a secret sea route that can allow us to reach the waters you wish to go to in 2 to 3 days.
Klein considered and simply said,
Very good. That's exactly what I want. In addition, those waters are more illusory than real.
Catalina retracted her gaze in thought as she looked at the entrance to the cabin. Frank Lee ran over and held a green apple in his hand. He beamed as he handed Klein the apple.
This is the outcome of another one of my projects. It's a crossbreed of medicine and fruits. It makes the consumption of medicine more enjoyable.
I'm afraid I'll end up even sicker after eating it.
Klein glanced at Admiral of Stars and saw her nod gently. Only then did he inwardly force himself to accept the apple while appearing calm on the outside. He then bit down at the apple. It had the taste of a normal apple, it just had a lot more juice, and the insides were softer. After a few bites, Klein discovered that his throat suddenly wasn't hurting. He didn't realize when he stopped coughing.
I have to say that it's rather magical. As long as it doesn't involve animals and humans, Frank Lee is really a genius that should be taken seriously in the Church of Earth Mother. Unfortunately, he ultimately became a devil-like person.
Klein looked at the poison expert and said frankly,
It's healed.
Frank didn't praise himself as he began casually introducing the pirates on the deck.
Very good.
After a while, Nina and the other supporting sailors swam up to the surface and returned to the ship. She held a metallic piece that had been rotten into an identifiable state and a piece of black hardened mud that was filled with honeycombed holes. She grumbled to Catalina.
Captain, there's no deep-sea well. That well's mouth isn't even bigger than my breasts. Of course, it's very deep and dark. It's unknown what's hidden in it.
She gestured using her hands. Catalina nodded without using the term bragging.
Exaggeration is a common trait of pirates and adventurers.
The diameter of the well's mouth is that small?
Klein puzzledly looked at the item in Nina's hand as he politely diverted his gaze from her body, which had streams of water flowing down. Catalina's gaze moved in sync with his, as she said,
Go into the details.